So if you've been paying attention to what's been going on in the UK recently, you'll know that the government, under the previous Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, proscribed the non-violent direct action group Palestine Action as a terrorist group, meaning anyone who expresses any support for them can face arrest and up to 14 years in prison. As far as I can see, this was done because our government is entirely in hock to the Israel lobby, and the fact that they believe that there is at least some amount of economic gains to be had by having people like Elbit Systems, who are an Israeli weapons manufacturer, operate in the UK and have it as a hub of manufacturing to be able to facilitate war crimes in Gaza. So Palestine Action would attack these facilities, but what triggered it? The prescription of this organisation, so that supporters can face up to 14 years in prison, was that they broke into an RAF base, RAF Bryce Norton, and sprayed some paint on some planes. That is it. They caused some criminal damage, which I believe they should be charged for. They did criminal trespass, which I believe they also should be charged for under those terms. But the prescription of non-violent direct action as quote-unquote terrorism is, in my opinion, ridiculous. But of course, that is now the law of the land, and all supporters of Palestine Action are essentially potentially going to get arrested and potentially go to prison as part of a sentence from that arrest and charging. This has ignited a bit of a free speech debate, not because of people inciting violence on Twitter, which seems to be half of the right wing's opposition to this current government, even though it's not this current government that did anything about people getting prosecuted under the Public Order Act, which is where Lucy Connolly got prosecuted under, because that was implemented by the Conservatives, and she was charged by a Director of Public Prosecutions who was appointed by the Conservatives. But this is an action taken to prescribe Palestine Action by the Labour government. So there's an actual thing that Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper and now Shabana Mahmood are all responsible for. And given that there was also a free speech debate around the stifling of pro-Palestinian speech in the United States, US outlet CNN have been covering the prescription of Palestine Action, which led to almost 1,000 arrests over the weekend for holding placards that say, and I quote, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action," unquote. Again, I'm quoting this, these are not my words, these are the words on the placards, just to be clear, met. Anyway, this is the segment that they did, where they talked about what they believe is a pretty insidious decision taken by the government. Let's watch.
Can you spell something?
The police might be about to arrest her.
Why does the UK government think these seniors are terrorists?
Have you been arrested before?
No, never.
Never?
No, I don't do things like this.
Their stories are at the heart of a debate roiling the UK. How far is too far to oppose the war in Gaza? Millions of people around the world have turned out on the streets, including in London.
And it's worth pointing out, as well as, of course, there are fringe groups such as Palestine Action who engage in direct action, there's been incredibly large protest movement across the country, which shows you the strength of public feeling on this issue. If you look at, for example, the polls on how people in the UK feel about Israel, they're mostly on the side of Palestine. In plurality, at the very least, right? When you look down at these surveys on sympathies to the conflict, Palestinian sympathy is the highest, then sympathy on both sides, and then Israel is right at the bottom. They support sanctions on Netanyahu, they support total denial of arms sales, and indeed the arrest of Netanyahu under his arrest warrant that he's held under for the ICC. These are all things that the UK public broadly agree on, and the pro-Palestinian movement is very large. And opinions of Israel are in the absolute gutter, as Israel know, because they've been studying it. So that's the context for these very, very large and consistent pro-Palestine protests in this country.
But almost 2 years on from Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, over 60,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed. Mass starvation continues to spread. For some, protesting is just not enough. Palestine Action is a UK-based group of hundreds of individuals. They accuse the UK arms industry of complicity in supporting Israel's government. They've targeted Israeli weapons factories, destroyed British military equipment, and even vandalized US President Donald Trump's golf course. This June action on a British airbase was...
And again, right, it is my opinion that these things are criminal damage and criminal trespass, right? It's clear, I think it's pretty clear to most people that this is criminal damage if you go into a private institution and smash up their stuff. don't think anybody is necessarily disagreeing with that. Are these actions of property damage akin to terrorism, i.e. the same that you get from Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or the Taliban? I think that's questionable. But clearly I disagree with the government on this.
Too far by the UK government, who designated them a terrorist organisation, meaning anyone taking part in these actions could face terrorism charges. Audrey Corno, who just turned 23, studied dance and drama. She's been a member of the group. She's vandalised the UK Defence Headquarters. And just a few months ago, she occupied a factory she claimed was supplying military equipment to Israel. She spent 2 months in jail.
So now you're out on bail, you have an ankle tag that you have to wear, you've got a curfew, you're waiting for your court hearing.
Yeah.
What are the maximum potential consequences to this?
The maximum term of 10 years imprisonment.
Would these actions have been worth it?
Yeah, of course.
What would it have been worth it for?
It's everyone's responsibility to do everything in our power to stop a genocide from happening.
And that's the thing, right? They've made a utilitarian calculus themselves, i.e. thinking that any amount of disruption that they would make in their own minds towards Israel's ability to prosecute the genocide is worth more than the potential freedom that they would lose from being locked up in prison for engaging, again, in criminal damage. Now, would count as terrorism, because they've now been prescribed as a terrorist organisation. So anything that they engaged in that would previously potentially have been just charged under criminal damage can now have a terroristic element applied to it as well.
I mean, there will obviously be people watching this who will think, you don't know enough about, you haven't been to Israel or to Gaza, have you? You don't know enough about the situation, you are just jumping on a bandwagon. What would you say to them?
Well, this isn't a bandwagon. The more I learned about how deeply complicit Britain is in the supply of arms to Israel and in fueling this genocide, the more I realized that the comfort that I enjoy living in London is soaked in Palestinian blood.
You've essentially spray painted a building, the MOD. You have stood on top of a rooftop. I don't mean to be diminishing your actions, but I mean, has any of what you and what Palestine Action have done really made much difference?
The two individual actions that I've done are two very small parts of a massive movement. Direct action against Elbit Systems has resulted in 2 factories being shut down.
Elbit Systems UK, a subsidiary of the Israeli arms manufacturer, was the main target for Palestine Action. They did not answer CNN's questions in relation to Palestine Action.
It's also worth pointing out as well that the designation of Palestine Action as a terrorist group is an opinion of the government, right? It usually has to be an opinion of any government. So when you look at, for example, the designation of Hamas as a terrorist organisation, you'll see that the BBC don't refer to them as that. They refer to them as a group that has been designated as a terrorist organisation by the government. But in their own reporting, they'll describe them as a militant group. Because, of course, the BBC itself is an impartial organisation. If it classifies all of its reporting as terms of whatever the government says is terrorism, then they are essentially taking the opinion of the government as roe, which means that they wouldn't be unbiased if they did that. So a lot of Zionists get mad at the BBC for not explicitly referring to Hamas as terroristic, when, of course, they can't do that without breaking impartiality rules, because they would be essentially taking the government's side, which they shouldn't be doing. They should be holding the government to account.
Now the UK government has designated Palestine Action a terrorist group. Even holding a sign in support is illegal, sparking fears that free speech itself is being stifled.
There is a Palestine Action against genocide.
For even supporting this group, you could be charged with terrorism yourself. You could spend up to 14 years in prison.
Yeah.
Are you prepared for that?
No, not at all. But there's just no choice. I don't feel like we have a choice.
Anyone showing any support for this group, even holding up a sign, is currently being arrested, which means hundreds of people here are being arrested.
The vote was also not on a single group, but a bundled vote on 3 groups at the same time. Yeah, the government deliberately put forward the prescription legislation on this because it had to be voted through by MPs. You can check where your MPs voted. I am luckily a member of the Green Party, and they all voted against proscribing Palestine Action. They bundled it together with 2 neo-Nazi groups, which were obviously terroristic, so that anybody who voted against it could be kind of harangued as supporting Nazi groups, whatever it was. Yeah, the Maniacs Murder Cult and Russian Imperial Movement were also prescribed in the same bill, so that anyone who voted against it could get smeared as somehow supporting the other ones, or indeed for supporting Palestine Action. There probably were plenty of MPs who did vote against, who didn't do so because they supported what Palestine Action was doing, but because they believed that it was not a justified use of the anti-terror legislation when you are essentially using it to ban people when all they've done is commit criminal damage, which is already a crime, by the way. It's already a crime to commit criminal damage.
Just follow me, madam. Thank you. Really a terrorist in your hands there, yeah?
Things are getting very rowdy.
People who will be committing offences will be arrested.
Everyone will be arrested.
Everyone that is committing offences will be arrested.
So essentially everyone holding a sign will be arrested.
If that sign falls within the remit of the
saying that they support Palestine Action.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people to arrest. That must be a real headache.
It is a lot of people, yeah.
That's literally the point. So what the action here is from people holding up the signs specifically is that they are trying to overwhelm the justice system. We already have a stretched prison population at time of recording, so much they've had to release rapists and murderers onto the streets because they try to free up prison space. So overwhelming the justice system, which already doesn't have enough barristers who'd previously been on strike because of underpaying, they will show the ridiculous nature of this prescription. It makes it far harder to justify the prescription when people who are looking at the realities of what that means in practice are seeing old ladies holding signs arrested, which doesn't look like a government that knows what it's doing. It's a tactic that has a lot of optical significance. It's also interesting that people hold up signs supporting loyalist militias in the occupied 6 counties very frequently. Max Robespierre was making this point, and people like the Ulster Defence Association are raped. And yet, do we see the same action being taken for people holding up UDA signs in the 6 counties? No, we don't. I wonder why.
You have to fight against things which are wrong. And this is wrong. Not being allowed to speak about it is wrong. Palestine Action weren't a terrorist group. They hadn't harmed anybody. What Israel are doing is terrorism.
The essential case against Palestine Action.
The politician John Woodcock, Lord Wolney, was the UK government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption. The 300-page report he wrote last year was a major factor in banning Palestine Action under anti-terrorism laws.
I take real exception to that idea of this being a peaceful protest. The definition of terrorism absolutely encompasses the kind of economic damage for a political cause which Palestine Action have systematically carried out.
It's so silly that that's one of the definitions that they can use here. It is very interesting as well, they point out that he is instrumental in writing a report that led to this prescription. When you look here, of course, when he was an MP, he was a member of Labour Friends of Israel. And if you look here, he's a paid chair of the Purpose Defence Coalition, members of which include arms manufacturer Leonardo, which has extensive links to Israel's military. He's a paid chair of the Purpose Business Coalition, members of which include Leonardo and oil company BP. He's a paid senior advisor to Ruud Peterson, a lobbying company with expertise in security and defence, which has oil and gas companies Glencore and Enel Energy as clients. The group's Good Law Project and Compassion in Politics made an official complaint to the House of Lords Commissioner for Standards, stating that Woodcock has a commercial interest in an organisation whose clients have been targeted by the very protesters whose activities he seeks to ban. So it doesn't look like he's particularly independent, do you?
Putting them in the same category as ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas.
So I think that there is a gap in the law, which I identified in my report, that there is a category of criminal behaviour that is politically motivated, which can fall under the definition of terrorism, that at the moment there is not the sufficient tools to be able to stop and deter.
I mean, when you see these, I spoke to a 70-something-year-old grandma at these protests, literally holding up a sign and getting arrested. Do you think they're a terrorist?
If they meet and they are doing this to overwhelm the criminal justice system very deliberately.
But they're also exposing what they see as the ridiculousness of the prescription. Half of the people that I saw at the protests were over 60.
I mean, because essentially it makes it look very difficult to police, because this is the biggest year for terrorism-related offences in the history of the United Kingdom, by like factors of 10. It looks very, very stupid for the government. It's there to humiliate the government and, by proxy, their advisor here, John Woodcock, over the nature of what the ban represents in practice. That's the whole point.
I mean, they're not what people think of when they think of terrorists.
No, sure, but
so are they terrorists?
Well, the criminal justice system will have to deal with them, and
But you're saying they are terrorists.
No, I'm saying that if you.
But you're not answering the question. Are they? Do you see them as terrorists?
if you.
Well, you're the one pushing this prescription, so surely you think that they are terrorists.
It's very, very good questioning here, because he was clearly flustered and flummoxed. He couldn't answer the question, because the reality is that 60-year-old grannies holding signs obviously aren't terrorists, But the prescription is about support for a terrorist group. Well, you don't necessarily be a terrorist yourself, but you can support the group, and that would lead you to having committed a crime that you can be charged for under the prescription legislation. But of course, it's very silly. That's the whole point.
If you break the law, then you face having a criminal record.
A terrorist.
You face having a criminal record as a terrorist. And they know that. And they know that. And that's why they are doing it.
Are you the right person to have been advising the UK government on this? I mean, you were the head of Labour Friends of Israel. Yeah. You have taken several all-expenses trips paid to Israel.
Yeah, because he's a fucking Zionist shill. Of course he is. It seems like he hasn't been scrutinised like this before. He's presumably very sheltered from the shit he unleashed. Well, yeah, because most people within the British press are all very cucked to Israel. We'd have to get in American news organisations to actually see our representatives questioned accordingly.
And so you can understand, why people would question your motivations.
I could understand why they would want to, because they don't want to account for their own actions. But people will make.
Well, no, because what you don't want to account for is the fact that you're out here essentially currying favour for a genocidal colonial ethno-state currently butchering men, women and children, and criminalising people who want to try and halt that. The methods you may disagree with. I personally think that criminal damage is bad. I personally think that supporting terrorist organisations is bad, and I do not do such a thing. To make it very clear for people watching, I do not support Palestine Action. But fundamentally, the important thing here is that genocide is far worse than holding a sign. I don't think that should necessarily be controversial.
Make up their own minds on me. My interests and declarations are out in the open. That's why you're able to talk about it. We ought.
No, that's not the issue. That's not the issue, John. The issue is that you've put out all of these conflicts of interest, and that no action has been taken to ensure that you're not acting with a conflict of interest. Just because you've declared it doesn't mean that you're not acting within it. And the problem is, of course, is that you take your declaration as put you in the clear, when in reality you've barely been scrutinised outside of independent media, and now apparently fucking centrist CNN, over this huge, gigantic conflict of interest, which makes you completely unfit to be in the role that you're in government.
To be able to say, it's not okay to break the law and to terrorise working people.
I mean, nobody thinks that breaking the law is anything other than breaking the law. That's the whole point. People expect to be charged for breaking the law. That's how breaking the law works. The difference here is whether or not criminal damage amounts to terrorism, which I think a lot of people disagree with.
In the meantime, other activists continue to take direct action.
We're still locked on
against arms manufacturers they accuse of complicity in the bombing of Gaza. and protesters holding up signs continue to risk arrest to support Palestine Action.
But again, it's important to say that they're not just doing it to show support for Palestine Action. They're doing it, as has been pointed out ironically by John Woodcock, specifically to overwhelm the justice system. It is a optical act to show the public that what's happening is very silly. Yeah, fuck Yvette Cooper. Supports people who do. I hate her. And now she's foreign secretary, so she gets to liaise with the people who she clearly serves, having been given loads of money by people who are sympathetic to Zionism, right? Like, brilliant. Although at least that means we've got yet another Labour minister implicated in being in support of a genocidal ethno state, but hopefully that never catches up to them. Fingers crossed. I'm definitely not being sarcastic. But yeah, that was, in all seriousness, really good reporting there by CNN. It's weird how you expect America to be really bad because they've got very kind of partisan journalism. But because they don't have the private school problem that we do, they don't have the Oxbridge problem we do, they don't have this kind of central cadre of groupthink journalists who, no matter what outlet that they work in, they report the same shit. They actually have people who studied journalism to do actual journalism, regardless of how partisan that it might be in America, which it does have a partisan problem. At the very least, when they do questioning of politicians, they actually question them, rather than just give them softball interviews like you see from fucking Beth Rigby asking Rachel Rose about her lunch. But yeah, good little report then. Very strange to see a British politician actually scrutinised for once. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.